Stop the cameras. Dr. Phil's voice cut through the studio like a blade. His hand shot up toward the control booth. The audience gasped. Producers froze. The woman sitting across from him clutched a weathered photograph to her chest, tears streaming down her face. For the first time in 25 years of broadcasting, Dr. Phil McGraw looked genuinely shaken. What happened next would become the most powerful moment in television history. The interview had started routinely enough. It was a standard Tuesday taping. The topic: long-lost stories of gratitude. The production team had scheduled 3 guests, each with a story of someone who had changed their life. Standard fare for daytime television. Sarah Mitchell was the second guest. The production notes described her as a 47-year-old schoolteacher from Ohio. Calm demeanor. Well-spoken. She wanted to share how a stranger's advice 25 years ago had saved her from a destructive path. Dr. Phil walked onto the stage to his usual thunderous applause. He settled into his chair, glanced at his notes, and began with his trademark directness. Sarah, welcome to the show. I understand you have a story about someone who changed your life. Yes, Dr. Phil. Actually. Sarah's voice wavered. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small frame. It was you. The studio went silent. Dr. Phil leaned forward, his brow furrowed. I'm sorry, what? 25 years ago, Sarah continued, her hands trembling as she held the frame. You weren't on television yet. You were still doing private practice in Texas. I was 22 years old, homeless, addicted to methamphetamine, and I had just been arrested for the 3rd time. The audience was completely still. This wasn't in the notes. The producers in the control booth exchanged confused glances. Dr. Phil's expression shifted from professional interest to something deeper. Something personal. The court ordered me to see a psychologist before sentencing, Sarah said, her voice stronger now. Most of the therapists I'd seen before just went through the motions. But you stopped mid-session, looked me dead in the eye, and said something I'll never forget. Dr. Phil's face went pale. His jaw tightened. You said, Sarah, I don't care what you've done or where you've been. Right now, in this moment, you get to choose who you're going to be. Not tomorrow. Not next week. Right now. And I'm going to sit here until you make that choice. The photograph Sarah was holding showed a much younger Dr. Phil sitting in a small office, and next to him, a thin, hollow-eyed young woman with sunken cheeks and desperate eyes. We sat in silence for 47 minutes. Sarah continued, tears flowing freely now. Everyone else had given up on me. My parents, my friends, the legal system. But you refused to end that session until I decided. And finally, I chose to fight. Dr. Phil stood up abruptly. The microphone nearly fell from his lapel. Hold on. His voice was thick with emotion. Hold on, just, everybody stop. He turned to the control booth, his hand cutting through the air. Cut. Stop the tape. Right now. The red recording lights blinked off. Camera operators lowered their equipment. The audience sat frozen, unsure if they should move. Dr. Phil walked around the coffee table separating them and stood directly in front of Sarah. For a long moment, he just stared at the photograph in her hands. You were the girl from Travis County, he said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. April 1999. The judge ordered a psychological evaluation. Yes. Sarah nodded, unable to speak through her tears. I remember you. The words hung in the air like a prayer. The audience, the crew, even the producers watching from the booth, everyone felt the weight of this moment. Dr. Phil took the frame from Sarah's trembling hands and studied it. His thumb traced the edge of the photo. When he looked up, his eyes were glassy. I went home that night, Dr. Phil said, his voice raw with emotion. And I told Robin I wasn't sure if I'd gotten through to you. I wondered if I'd said the right things. If I'd pushed too hard or not hard enough. He handed the frame back to Sarah, then did something he'd never done on camera before. He sat down in the guest chair next to her, abandoning his host's position entirely. Tell me what happened after that day. Subscribe and leave a comment, because the most powerful part of this story is still ahead. Sarah wiped her eyes and took a shaky breath. After our session, something shifted inside me. For the first time, someone had seen me not as a problem to fix, but as a person worth waiting for. Worth believing in. The court sentenced me to mandatory rehab. She continued. 90 days. It was hell. Every cell in my body screamed for the drugs. But every time I wanted to give up, I heard your voice. Right now, you get to choose. Dr. Phil listened without interrupting, his full attention on her, not on the cameras, not on the audience, just on Sarah. I completed the program. Got my GED while I was there. When I got out, I was terrified. I had no job, no place to live, no support system. I went back to that courthouse where we met, and I asked the clerk if she knew how to reach you. She told me you'd left private practice to work on Oprah's show, Sarah said with a small laugh. I thought, of course he did. He's going to help so many more people than just me. So I wrote you a letter. Dr. Phil's head snapped up. You wrote me? Sarah nodded. I sent it to the Oprah show in Chicago. I don't know if it ever reached you. But writing it helped me. I told you I was choosing to fight. Every single day. And I thanked you for being the first person who made me believe I could. Dr. Phil looked toward his producer offstage. Did I ever get that letter? The producer, visible in the studio wing, shook his head slowly, looking stricken. The volume of mail the show received, thousands of letters monthly, meant many never reached him personally. I'm so sorry, Dr. Phil said, turning back to Sarah. I never saw it. It's okay, Sarah said quickly. Because I didn't stop there. I got a job cleaning offices at night. Saved every penny. Enrolled in community college. It took me 6 years, but I got my bachelor's degree in education. The audience began to murmur with emotion. Several people were crying. Today, I'm a high school counselor in Cincinnati, Sarah continued, her voice growing stronger. I work specifically with at-risk teens. Kids who remind me of who I was. And Dr. Phil, every single day, I tell them what you told me. Right now, in this moment, you get to choose who you're going to be. Dr. Phil's composure cracked. He pressed his hand over his mouth, his shoulders shaking slightly. How many kids have you helped? He asked, his voice hoarse. In 15 years? Maybe 300 who've come through my program. But if I'm honest, the number is higher. Because those 300 kids go out and make better choices, and they influence others, and those others influence more. Your words didn't just save me, Dr. Phil. They've rippled out further than either of us can count. What Dr. Phil did next shocked everyone. He stood up and walked off stage. The audience gasped. Producers stood up in alarm. Had he left? Was the interview over? But 10 seconds later, Dr. Phil returned holding a small wooden box. This, he said, his voice steadier now but still emotional, is something I've kept in my dressing room for 20 years. Robin gave it to me when the show first started. He opened the box. Inside were dozens of small cards, each one handwritten. These are reminders, Dr. Phil explained. Reminders of why I do this. Reminders that even when I don't see the results, even when I don't know if I'm making a difference, somewhere out there, someone might be listening. Someone might be choosing. He pulled out a blank card and a pen. Right there, in front of the cameras and the audience, he wrote. Sarah Mitchell. April 1999. Travis County. She chose to fight. He placed the card in the box and closed it carefully. You gave me something today, Dr. Phil said, looking directly at Sarah. You gave me proof that the work matters. That the words matter. That showing up, even for one session, even for 47 minutes, can change everything. The audience exploded into applause. People were standing, crying, hugging strangers next to them. Dr. Phil extended his hand to Sarah, but she shook her head and stood up. Instead of shaking hands, she hugged him, a long, tight embrace that communicated 25 years of gratitude, survival, and triumph. When they finally pulled apart, Dr. Phil called out to his team, "Get me the contact information for Sarah's school. I want to set up a scholarship fund for her kids. The teens she's helping, they're going to have every resource they need." The audience erupted again. Sarah covered her face, overwhelmed. Dr. Phil turned to the camera, not to his usual center camera, but to camera 2, the one that captured more intimate shots. "Here's what I want everyone watching at home to understand," he said, his voice firm now, back in his element. "You never know when your words, your actions, your simple presence is going to be the thing that saves someone. You don't always see the results. You don't always get the thank you. But that doesn't mean it didn't matter." He glanced at Sarah, who nodded encouragingly. "Sarah came here today not because she needed me, but because she wanted to give me a gift. She wanted me to know that that day in 1999, when I was questioning myself, wondering if I was making any difference, she wanted me to know that I did. And that gift is something I'll carry forever." Share and subscribe. Make sure this story is never forgotten. The cameras started rolling again officially. Dr. Phil and Sarah sat back down, but the formal interview structure had dissolved completely. What followed was a conversation, raw, real, and unscripted. Dr. Phil asked about Sarah's students. She told him about Marcus, a 15-year-old who'd been expelled from 2 schools and was now on track to graduate with honors. About Jasmine, who'd survived abuse and was now studying to become a social worker. About Derek, who'd lost both parents and found purpose mentoring younger kids in the neighborhood. "They're all choosing," Sarah said. "Every single day. And I tell them the same thing you told me. Right now, in this moment, you get to choose who you're going to be." Dr. Phil pulled out his phone, something he rarely did on camera, and asked Sarah to add her contact information. "I'm going to check in with you," he said. "Not for the show. Not for publicity. For me. Because you've reminded me why this all matters." As the interview wrapped up, Dr. Phil made one final gesture. He asked the production team to bring out a special package they prepared for guests, resources, books, connections to support networks. But then he added something spontaneous. "Sarah, I want you to take that photograph home," he said, pointing to the framed picture she'd brought. "But I want you to add something to it." He grabbed a marker from the production desk and wrote on the back of the frame, "She chose to fight. April 1999, present day. The work continues." He signed it and handed it back to her. "Hang this in your office," Dr. Phil said. "Let your kids see it. Let them know that someone believed in you, and now you believe in them. That's the legacy. That's how we change the world, one choice at a time." The studio erupted one final time. After the cameras officially stopped rolling, Dr. Phil and Sarah talked for another 20 minutes off camera. Producers captured some of it on phones, not for broadcast, but for their own memories. It was too pure, too sacred to package for television. Sarah showed Dr. Phil photos of her students, her family, her life. Dr. Phil shared stories about guests he'd wondered about over the years, moments when he'd questioned whether his words had landed. "You can't save everyone," Sarah told him. "But you saved me. And through me, you've saved hundreds more. That has to be enough." Dr. Phil nodded, his eyes wet again. "It's more than enough. It's everything." As Sarah prepared to leave the studio, the audience, who had remained seated the entire time, unwilling to break the spell, gave her a standing ovation that lasted nearly 3 minutes. Dr. Phil walked her to the edge of the stage, then did something he'd never done before. He asked the audience to bow their heads. "I'm not a religious man in the traditional sense," Dr. Phil said, his voice carrying through the silent studio. "But I believe in gratitude. I believe in acknowledging when something greater than ourselves is at work. And today, we witnessed that." The moment transcended television. It became something holy. When Sarah finally left the studio, she carried with her not just the photograph and Dr. Phil's words, but something intangible. The knowledge that her pain had purpose, that her survival had meaning, and that her story would inspire countless others. Dr. Phil returned to his dressing room after the taping. He opened the wooden box again and stared at the new card he'd written. Sarah Mitchell. April 1999. Travis County. She chose to fight. He called Robin and told her everything. Through tears, he said, "I've been doing this for 20 years, and I've wondered sometimes if it matters. Today, I got my answer." The episode aired 3 weeks later and became the most watched Dr. Phil show in history. YouTube clips accumulated over 200 million views. Schools across the country began using Sarah's story in their counseling programs. The phrase, "Right now you get to choose," became a rallying cry for people struggling with addiction, depression, and hopelessness. But for Dr. Phil, the impact was simpler and more profound. He knew, truly knew, that showing up matters. That sitting with someone for 47 minutes in silence matters. That refusing to give up on a person, even when everyone else has, matters. Sarah returned to Cincinnati and continued her work. But now, when students asked her why she believed in them so fiercely, she'd show them the photograph. She'd tell them about a psychologist who refused to let her quit on herself. And she'd tell them the truth. "Someone believed in me when I couldn't believe in myself. And now I'm passing that gift forward to you. Right now, in this moment, you get to choose who you're going to be. And I'm going to sit here until you make that choice." The legacy of that 1999 session didn't end with Sarah. It multiplied through every student she helped, every life those students touched, every choice that rippled outward into the world. And it all started with one man who refused to give up and one woman who chose to fight. Years later, Dr. Phil would say in interviews that Sarah's return was the moment he understood the true scope of his work. Not the television ratings, not the book sales, not the fame, but the quiet, unnoticed moments when someone decides to keep breathing, keep trying, keep choosing. That's the real legacy. That's the work that matters. And that's why, 25 years after a single therapy session in a small office in Texas, Dr. Phil McGraw stopped the cameras and remembered that before he was a television personality, he was a psychologist who believed in the power of one moment to change everything.